I thought I understood it too. After all, it seemed simple enough. Sad character, gloomy weather, angry character, stormy skies, happy ending, bright sunshine breaking through the clouds. But when I started researching the history and true meaning of pathetic fallacy, I discovered just how wrong I was. You see, back in 1856, when art critic John Ruskin first coined the term pathetic fallacy in his work Modern Painters, he wasn't just talking about matching weather to emotions. He was describing something far more specific and fascinating. To illustrate this, let's look at one of his original examples. When Ruskin analyzed a poem that described a cruel, crawling foam on the ocean, he wasn't focused on whether the weather matched the scene's mood. Instead, he was interested in why we attribute human emotions like cruelty to something as inhuman as sea foam. This discovery sent me down a rabbit hole that would completely transform my understanding of this literary device. What I found was that pathetic fallacy isn't just about creating atmosphere. It's about the peculiar human tendency to project our emotions onto the natural world around us. And as it turns out, this tendency reveals something profound about how we process emotions and relate to our environment. So, if pathetic fallacy isn't just about matching weather to mood, what exactly is it? And why has this misconception persisted for so long? To answer these questions, we need to explore how this literary device has evolved from its Victorian origins to its modern applications in everything from classic literature to contemporary climate fiction. By the end of this journey, you'll never look at a gloomy, rainy day quite the same way again. In Charles Dickens' Great Expectations, we find Pip walking through a misty marshland, the fog reflecting his confusion about his place in the world. In Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights, storms rage outside Thrushcross Grange as Heathcliff's passion and anger build. And of course, there's the classic dark and stormy night that appears in countless stories when something ominous is about to happen. While reading John Ruskin's original text from Modern Painters, 1856, I came across his analysis of the line, "the cruel crawling foam," from a poem about a tragic drowning. Ruskin wasn't interested in whether the foam matched the sad mood of the scene. Instead, he focused on why the poet had given the foam human qualities like cruelty and the ability to crawl with intent. Pathetic fallacy isn't just about matching weather to mood. It's about our tendency to project human emotions and qualities onto non-human things. Rain fell as Sarah cried. This is simple weather matching. The rain wept with Sarah, its tears joining hers. This is pathetic fallacy. In Samuel Taylor Coleridge's The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, he writes about the furious blast that, tyrannous and strong, drives the ship southward. The wind isn't just strong here. It's been given human qualities of fury and tyranny, suggesting conscious malevolence. Or consider Percy Bysshe Shelley's description in Ode to the West Wind. O wild west wind, thou breath of autumn's being. Here, Shelley isn't just describing a seasonal wind. He's transforming it into a conscious entity with its own existence and purpose. Research published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology suggests that this tendency to anthropomorphize nature might be deeply rooted in our psychological need to make sense of our environment. If pathetic fallacy is really about attributing human qualities to non-human things, why do we do it? And more importantly, why has this literary device persisted from the Victorian era right through to modern climate fiction and contemporary literature? Think about it. When you describe a gentle breeze or angry clouds, you're not just matching weather to mood. You're participating in a centuries-old tradition of seeing human qualities in the natural world. And as we'll discover, this tendency reveals something fascinating about how we process emotions and relate to our environment. But before we dive deeper into these cultural and historical variations, we need to understand exactly how Victorian writers like Ruskin viewed this device, and why he initially considered it a fallacy rather than a valuable literary tool. When John Ruskin coined the term pathetic fallacy in 1856, he wasn't trying to create a fancy new literary device. In fact, he was criticizing what he saw as a disturbing trend in poetry. First, let's clear up a common misconception about the word pathetic. In Ruskin's time, it didn't mean pitiful or inadequate as we often use it today. Instead, it came from the Greek pathos, meaning emotion or feeling. When Ruskin combined pathetic with fallacy, he was literally describing what he saw as an emotional falseness. But why did Ruskin consider it a fallacy? Let's look at one of his original examples. He took issue with these lines about a crocus flower. The spendthrift crocus, bursting through the mold, naked and shivering, with his cup of gold. Ruskin argued that this was a false perception. The crocus isn't actually spendthrift, wasteful with money, nor is it shivering. These are human qualities being incorrectly attributed to a flower. He believed that such descriptions, while poetic, represented a kind of emotional distortion of reality. Here's another example he used, this time from Samuel Taylor Coleridge. The one red leaf, the last of its clan, that dances as often as dance it can. Ruskin found these lines beautiful, but fundamentally false. The leaf isn't actually dancing by choice, it's simply being moved by the wind. He argued that attributing human will and merriment to a dying leaf was a distortion of truth, even if it created compelling poetry. Let's pause for a moment. Look at these two passages and see if you can spot how they use pathetic fallacy. 1. The cruel, crawling foam rolled in from the sea. 2. The wind whispered secrets to the trembling leaves. Did you spot the human qualities being attributed to non-human things? In the first example, foam isn't actually cruel, nor does it crawl with intent. In the second, the wind can't whisper secrets, and leaves don't actually tremble from emotion. This brings us to a fascinating paradox. While Ruskin criticized this device as a fallacy, he also acknowledged its power. In Modern Painters, he wrote that the pathetic fallacy could be excused when it came from intense emotion. He classified its use into different levels of acceptability, from the fallacy of willful fancy, which he condemned, to the fallacy of noble emotion, which he reluctantly accepted. What's particularly interesting is how Ruskin's views reflected broader Victorian tensions about truth, emotion, and representation. The Victorian era was grappling with rapid scientific advancement and industrialization, which created a cultural tension between objective truth and emotional expression. Research published in the Journal of Victorian Culture suggests that this tension was particularly acute in discussions of how to represent nature in art and literature. Consider how Ruskin's contemporary, Charles Dickens, used pathetic fallacy in Great Expectations. When Pip describes London's weather as having a vast, heavy veil that had been driving over London from the east, he's not just describing fog, he's creating a metaphor for the mysterious and oppressive nature of the city. Dickens wasn't concerned with literal truth. He was using pathetic fallacy to reveal deeper emotional and social truths. This tension between literal truth and emotional truth would continue to shape how writers used pathetic fallacy well into the modern era. But perhaps the most interesting development is how what Ruskin considered a fallacy became one of literature's most powerful tools for exploring the relationship between humans and their environment. Think about the questions this raises. If attributing human emotions to nature is a fallacy, why do we find it so compelling? And what does our persistent use of this device tell us about how humans relate to the natural world? The answers to these questions would emerge through decades of literary evolution, leading us to some surprising modern applications of this Victorian concept. As we peel back the layers of pathetic fallacy, we discover it operates on 3 distinct levels, each revealing something profound about how humans relate to their environment. Think of it like a pyramid, with each level building on the complexity of the previous one. At the base level, we have simple weather matching, what most people think pathetic fallacy is. It's the rainy funeral, the sunny wedding, the stormy confrontation. While these connections can be effective, they barely scratch the surface of what this device can do. The second level is where nature begins to reflect emotion, but with intention and specificity. Take Shakespeare's King Lear, for instance. When Lear rages against his daughter's betrayal, Shakespeare doesn't just give us a storm, he has Lear command the elements themselves. Blow, winds, and crack your cheeks. Rage, blow. The storm isn't just happening alongside Lear's madness, it's manifesting his psychological state with precise metaphorical parallels. But it's the third level where pathetic fallacy reaches its full potential. Nature as an active participant in the emotional narrative. This is what William Wordsworth achieved in I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud. When he writes about daffodils fluttering and dancing in the breeze, he's not just describing flowers moving in the wind. He's creating a complex emotional dialogue between the observer and the observed, where the daffodils become active participants in his journey from loneliness to joy. Modern literature has taken this third level even further. Consider how climate fiction authors like Barbara Kingsolver use pathetic fallacy in works like Flight Behavior, when she describes butterflies as bright tatters of orange floating in the air. She's not just creating pretty imagery, she's establishing these insects as conscious participants in a larger narrative about climate change and human responsibility. What makes this deeper understanding of pathetic fallacy so fascinating is how it reveals our psychological connection to nature. Research published in the Journal of Environmental Psychology in 2021 suggests that humans have an innate tendency to seek emotional resonance with their environment. When we attribute human feelings to nature, we're not just making poetic comparisons, we're engaging in a fundamental human need to find emotional meaning in our surroundings. This explains why pathetic fallacy has persisted and evolved since Ruskin first identified it. Far from being a mere fallacy, it's a reflection of how humans process and understand their relationship with the natural world. When Emily Bronte describes the moors in Wuthering Heights as watching and waiting, she's tapping into this deep-seated human tendency to seek consciousness in our environment. The implications of this understanding are profound. Consider how different cultures use pathetic fallacy. In Japanese literature, for instance, the attribution of consciousness to natural elements isn't seen as a fallacy at all. It's deeply rooted in Shinto beliefs about the spirit world. According to research published in Comparative Literature Studies, Japanese authors like Matsuo Basho wrote haiku that treated natural elements as conscious entities, not as metaphors, but as literal truth. This brings us to a crucial question. If pathetic fallacy isn't just a literary device, but a reflection of how humans relate to their environment, what does its evolution tell us about our changing relationship with nature? To answer this, we need to examine how modern writers are using this device in unexpected ways, particularly in response to environmental crisis and climate change. But before we explore these modern applications, let's test your understanding with a few questions. Can you distinguish between simple weather matching and nature as an active participant in a story? How might different cultures' views of nature affect their use of pathetic fallacy? What does our persistent use of this device tell us about human psychology? Keep these questions in mind as we move into examining how contemporary authors are pushing the boundaries of what pathetic fallacy can do. Now that we understand what pathetic fallacy really is, let's put our knowledge to the test. I'm going to show you 3 passages, and I want you to think about which ones truly use pathetic fallacy versus simple weather symbolism or metaphor. First passage. Rain poured down as Sarah received the bad news. Second passage. The rain wept with Sarah, each drop a tear of sympathy. Third passage. The vindictive rain lashed at Sarah's windows, determined to mirror her anger. Did you spot the differences? The first passage is simple weather symbolism. The rain just happens to match the mood. The second and third passages use true pathetic fallacy, but in different ways. The second attributes the human ability to weep and feel sympathy to the rain, while the third gives the rain both emotion, vindictiveness, and intention, determination. This distinction becomes crucial when we look at contemporary literature. Consider how Ocean Vuong uses pathetic fallacy in his 2019 novel, On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous. When he writes about the wind, restless and searching, like a child looking for its mother, he's not just describing movement, he's attributing complex emotional motivations to a natural phenomenon. But here's where many writers stumble. They fall into what I call the stormy mood trap, thinking that simply matching weather to emotions is enough. Real pathetic fallacy requires more. It demands that we give nature agency, emotion, or intention. Let's look at some common pitfalls. 1. The dark clouds gathered overhead. Not pathetic fallacy, simple description. 2. The dark clouds plotted their revenge. Pathetic fallacy, attributes intention. 3. The morning was bright and cheerful. Not pathetic fallacy, simple mood association. 4. The morning stretched its bright arms in welcome. Pathetic fallacy, attributes physical action and intention. Understanding these distinctions enhances our reading experience in unexpected ways. When you encounter a passage like this one from Richard Powers' The Overstory, 2018, the trees speak to each other in a language of signals and smells, reminders and warnings, you recognize it's not just poetic license. This becomes particularly relevant in climate fiction. Authors like Margaret Atwood and Paolo Bacigalupi use pathetic fallacy not just as a literary device, but as a way to explore humanity's relationship with a changing environment. When they attribute emotion or intention to weather patterns or rising seas, they're making a statement about human responsibility and natural consequences. So next time you're reading or writing, ask yourself, is the weather just matching the mood, or is it being given human qualities? What specific human emotions or intentions are being attributed to natural elements? How does this attribution deepen the meaning of the scene? Remember, pathetic fallacy isn't just about making nature mirror our emotions. It's about exploring how we project our humanity onto the natural world and what that projection reveals about ourselves. Whether you're analyzing classic literature or contemporary climate fiction, this deeper understanding transforms how you read and interpret these emotional attributions to nature. 2. We've journeyed from Ruskin's Victorian criticism to modern climate fiction, discovering that pathetic fallacy is far more than just matching weather to mood. It's a window into how humans project their emotions onto the natural world, revealing our deep psychological connection to our environment. First, how would you explain the difference between simple weather symbolism and true pathetic fallacy? Think about the last time you saw rain in a movie or read about a storm in a book. Was the weather just happening alongside emotions, or was it given human qualities like intention, feeling, or consciousness? Second, why did Ruskin consider this technique a fallacy, and do you agree with his assessment? Consider his Victorian context, a time of rapid scientific advancement and changing views about humanity's relationship with nature. Was he right to criticize the attribution of human emotions to non-human things as a distortion of truth? Or did he miss something important about how humans relate to their environment? Third, can you identify an example of pathetic fallacy in your favorite book or movie? Look beyond the obvious stormy confrontations or sunny celebrations. Search for moments where nature isn't just reflecting emotions, but actively participating in the emotional narrative with its own feelings and intentions. Finally, how might understanding pathetic fallacy change the way you write or interpret literature? Think about how this device has evolved from Ruskin's time to our current era of climate crisis. How might contemporary writers use pathetic fallacy differently than their Victorian predecessors? These aren't just academic questions. They challenge us to think more deeply about how we relate to our environment and how we express that relationship through language. Whether you're a writer crafting your next story or a reader exploring classic literature, understanding pathetic fallacy enriches your engagement with text and deepens your appreciation of how humans have always sought to find meaning in the natural world around them. The next time you encounter a description of nature in literature, look carefully. Is it just weather, or is it something more? Is it simple symbolism, or is it nature itself participating in the emotional landscape of the story? The answers might surprise you and change how you read forever. Remember, pathetic fallacy isn't just a literary device. It's a testament to humanity's enduring need to find emotional resonance in our environment, a need that continues to shape how we tell stories and understand our place in the natural world.